Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce my dear friend, Tom Van Berg. He is nice enough to take time out of his busy training schedule.
Oh, it's not that busy. This is great to have y'all out here. Thanks for stopping by. It's a
so
beautiful
humble.
day.
Yes, it is. Mother Nature has blessed us. So the first thing I want to do is just show a quick story that was highlighted this past Sunday on the Channel 7 News.
You ready to go again? You ready to go again?
One of the smaller stables at Oaklawn carries a larger-than-life name.
He's a big, pretty horse.
Tom Van Berg's now the boss at this barn. His father is Hall of Fame trainer Jack Van Berg. His father was Hall of Fame trainer Marion Van Berg.
It's not a job. It's not a career. It's your life.
Here's the finish. Wins it by
Jack's best known for winning the 1987 Kentucky Derby.
Jack Van Berg was right.
At the time, Tom was a teenager.
It was like you were a rock star, for me, being, 18 years old.
Naturally, Tom followed in his family's footsteps until his family's fortune took a turn for the worst. When his son was diagnosed with leukemia, Tom took a back seat in the business, sitting out for 10 years.
It took a long time to come to grips with that, and I think Dad had even a harder time than he ever let on. He couldn't figure out how I could let go of training and stop training.
Years later, his father's health took a turn for the worse too. In this April 2017 Beyond the Game story, Jack had become the grandfather of the grandstand.
I got another treatment this morning when I get done with you. I got to go there at 9:45 and go to radiation again.
Jack Van Berg died December 27th.
I don't know if it's really hit me yet that Dad isn't going to be here. Sometimes the hardest part is the drives going back and forth to Kentucky. So you get time to think. You want to pick up the phone and call him, and you can't.
Jack left Tom about 30 horses at Oaklawn and a deep determination to once again devote his life to the sport.
The Van Berg legacy is kind of what we're going on.
They're off.
And 4 days after his father's memorial, Tom saddled a horse. It was his first start in a decade.
Up the backstretch.
The horse's apt name, Profound Moment.
And now Profound Moment and Thoughtless have gone by Marquee Miss, and they will decide it. Thoughtless outside. Profound Moment at the rail. This one's going to be close. Profound Moment. Thoughtless. Profound Moment. Yes!
Was Jack Van Berg with you opening weekend?
No, yeah, no question. That was a tough one, but yeah, I think he rode that mare home. I really do.
Thomas L. Van Berg wins with Profound Moment indeed.
If there's ever a movie that's written about, his book or his life, that's the perfect ending. I mean, that's the last screenshot is that filly coming home, that mare coming home.
The sequel would start with Tom at this smaller stable, carrying a larger-than-life name.
Him looking down on us. Now, I'm sure he's still yelling at us and screaming at us his instructions, but we're trying to do, keep it operating the same way that he would have operated if he were here.
Well, that's right. Well, as your daddy would say, you know what to do, so let's start the sequel, right?
We're trying.
That's right. And you're doing a damn fine job, son.
It's been a long time between drinks. I know that. We got to win some more races.
Well, you're definitely rounding out the trifecta. Seconds and thirds are better than fourths.
We've had our shares of thirds, that's for sure.
Well,
yeah.
I had my share of those.
As Dad always said, they're always better than fourths. So
that's right.
We can hang our hat on that one.
All right. So I invited Tom as an amazing horseman in his own right. I mean, let's call a spade a spade. He came up under one of the greatest men to ever put a bridle on a horse. So let's start with the halter. So here we go with the halter and the shank. I always thought it was like almost the collar and the leash to the dog. So you won't go in a barn without seeing tons of these.
Yeah, it's a very simple piece of equipment. Basically, like you're saying, it's like a collar for a horse. They're made out of different materials. You have leather. This is your upper end one here, triple stitch. They also have nylon ones. Some of the nylons will actually carry a crown piece over here that's leather. This is the top part. And the reason they'll do that is because nylon won't break, but leather will. So if a horse ever gets hung up on a board or a fence or a screw eye or whatever, this leather will break. The nylon won't usually. It's very tough to break nylon. So these leather halters usually are a little bit safer alternative. Sometimes you'll see smaller tracks. They'll use machines to walk the horses. A lot of times trainers will employ nylon halters on there because they'll break these too easy sometimes, try to pull back from the machine. So basically a leather halter is your best bet. And as long as you keep it conditioned and work on it, it'll last you for years. So those are your basic, your halter. To catch a horse, you need a halter. If you ever see a horse coming down the track or the backside that's loose, it doesn't have a halter on, that's a trick. Try to get that thing corralled. So that's your keep your horse in check with the halter.
And if you're a really good horse, you get your name on it.
Yeah, you'll get brass nameplates. You'll see names on there, or their breeding, or their pedigrees for babies that have yet to be named. So you'll see those at the sales quite often.
Part of the care of a horse goes into, when horses come out for training every day, part of that is getting the horse prepped to come to the racetrack. That means a lot of times over in the course of the evening, they've rolled, they've gotten dirty. Trainers won't send a horse out unless they look pristine. So that means no dirt, no dust, no straw in the tail. And that's where this is just one example of, you see lots of different types of brushes, but this is a good old massage glove. And these actually feel, hold on to that. These actually feel really good because it's got the little dots on it, and you rub on them, and it breaks everything up, and it feels good, doesn't it? Yeah, it feels good. It feels good. So it basically loosens everything up, and then after you do this, you go and basically just trainers that send a horse out dirty. That's kind of my pet peeve.
Yeah, it's. I know my dad's longtime assistant, Sammy. He'll let the hair out of the ears grow long. He'll let long hair on the body, and he'll send a horse over there because he doesn't think the people will bet on it as much and he'll get better odds. He doesn't think the other trainers will claim him. So there are different viewpoints. It drives me nuts. I want to have a clean horse. My assistant, he not so much. He likes to come over and try to get the odds up on the horse.
That is a good strategy. Now you've given it up. Now every time a TVB horse comes over, and like, oh, he hadn't been clipped. There you go.
Don't let the ear hair fool you.
I actually keep one of these at home, but this is actually a really good tool to help clean a horse's feet. So
yeah, this is your basic hoof pick. Horses, when they're traveling on the track here, on the backside in their stalls, will get dirt, manure, anything packed in their hooves, and so you need to clean them out regularly, very regularly. Otherwise, they can get what's called thrush, and their hooves will start to a bacteria in their feet will start eating away. So this is a very important tool, probably one of the most important tools you'll see in a groom's kit that takes care of a horse's hoof pick. So this is the sharp part. It's not really sharp, it's rounded, but the strong part, you usually take it out, and this brushes the rest of the dirt out of the foot. So every day, 2 or 3 times a day, they'll clean their feet out and make sure there's nothing in there. And if there is some bacteria growing, they'll have to treat it and make sure that hoof is clean and dry. So this is your basic hoof pick.
When horses come over in the afternoon, you will see their legs, most of the time, you will see their legs wrapped. More so in the back, sometimes in the front. And this is the material that they are wrapped with. And a lot of times you've heard of the company 3M. This is the material, and a lot of times hospitals use this as well, but this is the material that their legs are wrapped with. Why do horsemen wrap their horses' legs, Tom, or their ankles?
Horse wraps, leg wraps started a long time ago, and you used to use what you all probably know as the ace bandage, so the elastic ace bandage. That is old school. They don't use as many ace bandages. Some old-time trainers will still use it, but with technology came vet wrap. 3M invented this, where it doesn't stick to your skin or to the horse's, but it will stick to itself, and you give it a little bit better wrap and a little tighter wrap. So if you've ever seen, say, a football player where he goes out for a play and they tape his ankle or wrap his ankle, same thing here. This basically gives the horse added support. When you talk about an animal that's 800 to 1,100 pounds and their ankles are no bigger than our wrist a lot of times, that's a lot of weight and a lot of pressure to put on a leg. So this gives them basically extra support when they're running. And if you ever watch a horse when they show you the replay in slow motion or the photo finish of how their legs will actually bend This helps them out so they don't go too far and injure themselves. So this is basically a support measure, and the advancements in technology that 3M has come with makes it a lot easier, especially when you get if you've been out the last couple of weeks, a sloppy track, those old ACE bandages would get heavy and they would hold water. This doesn't hardly hold any water. It's paper thin, and it just gives the same amount of support, if not more, than an old ACE bandage. So that's your legs wrapped you'll see on there sometimes. They're actually, do you have any polos?
No, I didn't bring polos, but I do want you to explain that. So you will see horses' legs wrapped in the morning, but they don't use it with this because this is what, $1.50 to $2 a roll.
Sometimes they do. If a horse
can get
really
a little
needs
costly.
It, yeah. If a horse really needs it, you may see it in the morning if it's a sloppy track. Otherwise, a lot of times they'll reuse ACE bandages because you can use those and wash them again. But what we're talking about with polos are like a thicker felt material, but they also can hold more water too. So it's usually on a fast track, or if a horse is coming over for the races, they'll put polos on their legs so the horse doesn't hit themselves. And what you're doing is just, it's a protective measure. If a horse has some action where sometimes he'll come up and hit himself with his hoof on the other leg and cut himself and you get infections, or it's timed down from training, it's basically a protective measure. So you put polos on, the thicker ones, and it's just basically like a felt pad around the whole leg so it protects the horse from injury.
Another thing that horses use to protect their feet, and they will use these also during training, more so to jog. These are called bell boots. As you can see, they do kind of look like a bell boot. There's a couple different kinds, but these offer a little bit more cushion. And as you can see, sometimes they're slip-ons, just like other different types of shoes, but these are Velcro. You want to pull that to open it up. And so explain why horses would use bell boots, Tom.
Bell boots are similar to your polos, except for their feet. They're just a protective measure. And when Nancy says that you use them more so when you're jogging, when these horses have been in training and you back them down and give them an easy day where they're just jogging, they tend to have a lot more energy, and so they'll jump around a lot more. And what these do is protect their front feet from their back feet coming up and grabbing their quarters of their front foot. And what they'll do is actually take a piece of that off. They have toe grabs, little pieces of aluminum on their shoes that will grab a hold of that front foot and will pull that skin right off there. So if they have these on, it'll protect their feet. So a lot of times you'll see them coming over for races in them. So they just don't want to hurt their feet coming over for a race. It's an added measure of protection. Or else when they're jogging, a lot of times you'll see them in the morning, so they protect their front feet from the same thing as getting a piece of skin grabbed off, and then you're dealing with an infection and a couple of days of lost training. So that's more of a protective measure as well.
This is part of this, I'm going to say, the steering wheel?
Yeah, steering apparatus.
Part of the steering apparatus. He's more well-traveled than I. So this is the bridle. So you will not see a horse train without a bridle, and this is part of that. So there's a lot of parts to the bridle.
Okay, this is basically your nose band. This kind of just basically controls the horse's head, keeps it. A lot of times when you get tough horses, they'll open their mouth up, and we'll show you another piece of equipment, and they have a tendency to make it more difficult for the rider to control them. So this is your basic nose band, and it kind of keeps the jaw together, and it keeps it so they don't get away from the rider and give them a tougher time to handle them. So a lot of times you'll see a nose band on here. I'm going to go quick over the real figure eight, and for a horse that is more problematic with it or has some breathing issues, this actually will go around their jaw here and then under their jaw. And so this one you can actually tighten down more. And so this is what's called a figure eight, and you'll see these on horses a lot of times in the races. Steve Asmussen is famous for using the black rubber ones. They're more of a standard size. Instead of this one, you can tighten down a little bit more. But what they do is they allow the rider to have a little bit more control for a horse that wants to get his mouth open and be a little bit more aggressive than the rider would like. This is your standard.
Notice it's purple.
Very nice, thank you. It looks like Len Klebrad's, though, not Van Berg colors. It's black and purple. So this is basically, this part on the top of the bit is called a head stall. Okay, and so this is a brow band. This goes over
right here
behind their ears, and this goes over their brow above their eyes, and then you have the two cheek pieces down into the bit. Okay, and that basically is their whole apparatus that will hold their head in this bit in their mouth. Okay, and so the bit down here is a silver part that we're dealing with, and this is a little specialty bit for horses that have breathing problems. But the reins right down here will hook onto this bit, and that's how the rider controls the horse. So the reins will go up over the horse's head and neck, and the rider will be behind him, and that's how he controls it. The rubbers here, call the rubbers, give the rider a better grip. And so a lot of times you'll see them, they'll take this and knot it up so they don't have a lot of extra rein. And then the only part they'll use is this part here. So you pull on the right side, the horse thinks he needs to go right. Pull on the left side, the horse thinks he needs to go left. You pull straight back, and the horse slows down. Hopefully, is what you're trying to do. That's the goal. So this is your basic equipment that you'll see on a horse, either way you exercise in the morning, racing in the afternoon, and you can change different pieces for different issues with horses, but this is your general equipment that you'll see on a horse.
So just like in your halter, which is leather, this is a leather bridle. There are also nylon bridles. There's hundreds of options that you can use. So an example where this particular type of bit, there are, how many types of bits would you say there are?
They're near 100 probably, maybe even over 100, depending on what you're looking for.
So I just brought a couple basic types of bits, and these are obviously interchangeable. So you can do, like, how often would you say, like, what goes into figuring out why a horse needs a different type of bit?
Okay, let me put this down first. I'll get this over here. Well, the first bit you usually see, and this is probably the softest type of bit. This is called a snaffle. And snaffle actually it doesn't necessarily mean, a lot of times you see this hinge bit in the middle, and that's usually the general term for a snaffle, but snaffle comes from an old term that this bit has no added leverage for the rider. So when you pull on the reins, it pulls directly on the mouth, okay? That's basically what a snaffle is. So this is actually hinged. This is called a D snaffle, okay? So there's different types. There'll be solid bars you see here. There'll be, on the side, they'll have a ring that's loose, and so the bit can travel around, so the reins move with the bit, okay? So there's variations, all kinds of variations. You'll see rings. This is called a ring bit. It's actually a ring snaffle because you don't have any leverage on here more. But the ring goes around their lower jaw. For horses that have more issues, they're stronger and you want more control. This has a rubber coating on the bar portion of it, on the hinge bar, and that's softer on their mouth for horses that have a sensitive mouth. So you can change these bits depending on what issues the horse has. And you usually start out with the softest, kindest bit, which is your regular snaffle. And these can vary even on these, is the size of the bar can be larger or smaller. And so the larger it is, the softer it is on the horse, the less influence you have on it. The thinner it is, the more pressure you can apply on the horse, so it gives you a little bit more strength. They can be coated in rubber. They can be made of copper. They even have rings on them for horses that are nervous and you want them to play with something in their mouth. So you can change different kinds of bit depending on the personality of the horse and the needs of the horse. Just like my dad always said, different children need different instruction. And some children, a lot more energy, and you just have to rein them in a little bit more. Same thing with horses. Each horse is individual. And so you'll see trainers, you won't see this much because you don't notice it in programs, but good trainers will change those up a lot when they see a horse need something different. And it won't be necessarily I go from a snaffle to a ring to another bit and on down the line. Usually they'll notice some kind of tendency that the horse is doing, and they'll put a particular bit on them to ease that situation, whatever it might be, whether horse gets in, gets out, fights the bit, doesn't like it. And so what they'll do is they'll change those bits to make the horse basically happier and more easily rideable for the rider and keep him in check. So that's what the different bits are used for, is to correct different habits of horses.
Very interesting. Another piece that can potentially go with the bridle, the figure eight, is the shadow roll, and could definitely potentially be used on sunny days like today, but you'll also see them on rainy days maybe. But a key thing that I've seen several trainers make very big mistakes is when it's raining, forget to wrap this in saran wrap. Sure. Because this can get really heavy in the rain.
It can. And the thing about horses is, and we'll talk about blinkers later, but their vision, only about 60% of their vision is binocular, which means they can see depth perception. The rest of it is with one eye, and all it can see, it can't tell how far the object is away. It can just see an object. And so part of their binocular vision is in the front, majority of the front, where both eyes can see, except for a little part right in front of their head. And so naturally a horse, when it goes and sees, through the evolution of the horse, when it sees something on the ground, it's going to step over it or jump over it. Now, some horses are more particular about things when they see things, and some aren't. So say like when it's sunny out there and you see next to the rail there's that shadow. a horse comes over that, and some horses are particularly sensitive to that vision, to that depth perception, might think that's a log or something, and they'll try to jump over it. And what they do is they'll put their head up, and then they'll try to go over it. Well, to compensate that is they put a shadow roll on there so they don't see that ground. And what they'll do is that all the horse will see is the shadow roll, and it'll stop it from trying to jump over those shadows on the ground. That's why it's called shadow roll. But it might be anything. It could be a hoof print. It could be
tire tracks
from the tractors. It could be any kind of change in the surface. And so this is called a shadow roll. And sometimes you'll see horses that carry their heads higher. A lot of time they'll try to keep their head off of something on the ground, their eyes, and so they'll put this on there, and you'll see the head lower over time, and it'll get more comfortable, and it'll stop that horse. The thing is, these horses, these tracks, and the superintendents of these tracks do such a good job at maintaining these tracks that even though it looks like there's differences in the surface from step to step or tire track to tire track, it's pretty much the same as far as the horse is concerned traveling. And so they don't have to use that perception to jump or to move over something. The jockey can control them in that if there's some kind of issue in front of them. So that's what the shadow roll is for. It stops them from carrying their head and wanting to jump over shadows.
Now, one thing that came about fairly recently, I would say within the last 10, 15 years, a lot of people use them to sleep, and a lot of athletes use them as well, is the nasal strip. And I know Dwayne Lucas uses them. I think he's actually sponsored.
I'm sure he is. If there's anybody sponsored by somebody, it's Lucas.
So you might see, it almost looks like a piece of duct tape on the horse's nose when they come over. Some train in them, but you will see several horses use them during racing, and it goes just over the lower part of the nose. I pretty much can guarantee your dad never used a nasal strip.
No, I think he used them on myself. I mean, these are basically an equine breathe right strip is what they are. So basically, horses are nose breathers, and so if you can open those air passages better for them, the more air they can take into their lungs. And so that's basically what this does, is you spread it on, you spread the nasal passages open, just like you do if you're a snorer at home or you have breathing problems. It's the same thing. It's an equine breathe right strip, and it basically opens their air passages for the horse to get, basically it's like a turbocharger on a vehicle. You're trying to get as much air in that engine as possible. And that's what the breathe right, these nasal strips are for on horses.
All right, the next thing is very interesting. Does anybody have a dog that's maybe afraid of thunder or that gets really nervous? This is something that has recently come about, and these are noted in the program. It's called a hood, and it is different from blinkers. As you'll notice, there's no cup. It's just a hood. And these have come about because it's made with a titanium-based material. So it's kind of the thunder blanket, if you will, for horses. And a lot of trainers are really starting to use these, and they have become quite popular. So these are noted in the program. It's almost to give a calming experience for the horse. We've never used one, so I can't speak from experience, but a lot of trainers really do think they work. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, these are basically like your copper fit Brett Favre for the head. And what you'll notice is on horses, there are really two release points of pressure. One is right behind their ears. It's called the pole, and one is right under their lip. Okay, so you'll see sometimes people will have, when they have these shanks, they'll put them around and put it under their lip. If you see them come over horses, particularly wild or fractious, that actually releases endorphins. There's a point under their lip that releases endorphins, and it'll calm them down. Same thing, they'll have, I can't remember, stabilizer it used to be called. And it's the same thing. It was like basically a halter that would put added pressure on the pole, and that would also release endorphins, and it'd calm a horse down, have a calming influence. This is the same technique here. Basically, when you're talking about your chi, this is basically what's working on the electrical energy in your body, in the horse's body. And so what they're doing is they're basically trying to release those endorphins and get in the horse to calm down. Same strategy here. Horses are very sensory. Driven animal.
Motivated.
Exactly. Thank you. Yeah. Well, driven, so more so. It might not always be motivated, but you might not want that
Sometimes
attitude.
less than
but
others.
they're very sensory, driven horses. And so whether it's sight, whether it's sound, there's a lot of things that will get a horse to act in ways that you don't want, whether it be a rider, whether it be a trainer, whether it be the groom. And so you're always trying to figure out what piece of equipment basically make the horse happiest. And so that's one addition you can do is if you have a particularly nervous horse and you want to settle him down, those are one addition that you can try to see if that'll work. Some it works on, some it doesn't. So each one you have to try and see what works. And the better trainers out there are the ones that can usually first time or second time nail that addition of equipment that makes a big difference on that horse's performance.
Now, before we get to my favorite piece of equipment, in regards to claiming, like when you purchase a horse, he comes into your barn the first time, what are some of the things that you look for in regards to potentially making a change in equipment? Like if you saw something in that particular race that you didn't like, do you go the blinker route? Do you go the bit route? Do you go, how do you equate that horse? Do you just watch him train in the morning? What goes into that?
Ever since I can remember, our first go-to off of any claim is the feet. My father, my grandfather were very big believers in you have to have a good foundation on a building, and the same way with the horse. If there's a problem with the feet, there's going to be a problem all the way up through the horse's body and through his mind and everything else. So every time we claim a horse, the first thing we go to is feet, and we work on the feet. As far as equipment, it's more of I usually note when the horse is claimed what they're wearing and what they're using. Mm-hmm. And then I will look back on the races that I've watched of that particular horse and then watch him train and see if he needs it or if he doesn't need it or if there's something we can add or subtract on that performance. And so, whether it's equipment, whether it's the physical, well-being of the horse, feet, knees, legs, whatever, muscles, or whether it's distance changes, that's all basically determined after we get the horse in the barn and take a look at it and see what we can do to try to make that horse a better performer.
Now, this is my favorite piece of equipment because there's an amazing story behind it as well. I had the honor and the privilege to have Jack as my guest at Dawn at Oaklawn on several occasions. And this is also a great story in Jack's book, Jack from Grit to Glory. And this came about, I know it looks funny, from one of his trips to Argentina. So tell us about this and how it came to be.
Well, traditionally, when horses have issues with sound, whether it's the crowd, whether it's the tractors, whether it's the beer truck unloading kegs of beer at Oaklawn here, what they do is they place balls of cotton in their ears. And when Dad was young, when my father was young, and he ever had an ear infection, his mom would put cotton in his ears, and he just couldn't stand it. He'd shake his head, and he hated it, didn't like the feeling. Well, he would notice horses do the same thing when they had cotton in their ears. Some horses would like it, and they'd be okay with it. Some horses didn't like it. And so he thought, when he was down in Argentina, he saw them down there, and they actually wore these ear muffs without any padding in them because of the bugs, and the bugs would get in their ears. And so they'd wear these ear muffs to block the bugs, or these ear screens, they would call them. And so when he came back to the States, he had one of the manufacturers of the silks and the blinkers put a pair of earmuffs on here, but actually put foam padding in them. And the original ones, we actually had foam padding from, like you'd see in a cushion in a couch. We would place it in there inside the earmuffs ourselves, and then we'd put the earmuffs on there. But then they started incorporating the foam padding into the earmuffs themselves, and he started wearing the earmuffs in this fashion. Dad's most famous horse known for this hood is a horse named Gate Dancer. If you ever watch Gate Dancer, he didn't have the cups on the blinkers. Cups are known for basically making a horse focus, or if they see other horses and shy from them, they keep them straight. But he didn't need the cups for the focus. What he didn't like was the sound. And so whenever he came down the stretch, he would always have a tendency to what's called lug in, and that means he'd lean in and start going down towards the inner rail. Well, Dad didn't think it was anything with the horse's mouth, which tends to be normally the case. He thought it was the crowds. And back in those days, in the 80s, there was pretty large crowds in those big races. And what would happen when that crowd would start cheering, as soon as that crowd started cheering at the top of the stretch, he wouldn't do anything down the backside. He wouldn't do anything going in the first turn. But as soon as he came down the stretch and that crowd started cheering, that horse would turn his head like this and look at it. And naturally, like if you're driving in a car and you turn your head this way, where do you think that car is usually going to go? You start going this way when you look back at the road, right? So that's what Gate Dancer would do. He would look up at that crowd and he would start leaning in on the horse next to him, wouldn't even think about it. He just thought he was running. And so as soon as he put these earmuffs on, he started running straight, and that's when he really started running amazing. And the amazing thing about that horse is he probably, half his races only ran about 70% of his ability. He was just a big goofball. I mean, he was a kid that didn't have any focus, just had a ton of ability, and he would just, I've seen races where he was 20 lengths out of you, think there's no way this horse is going to get it, and then he'd just start swallowing ground up, and then he'd get done, and he wouldn't even be blowing. He's like, what do we do next? Where am I going here? And that was just his way. He was so freakishly athletic that if he ever ran 100% of his, he would have been maybe one of the all-time greats. He was a very amazing horse.
So there was a little, for lack of a better word, discrepancy of one of the jockeys that when he saw this piece of equipment that your dad had fashioned, that he wasn't so sure.
You can say who it is. I
No,
don't think he's going to mind.
I mean, I don't want to say who
Yeah,
it is.
no. Eddie Delahousse did not like those. They thought he looked like Bugs Bunny. And so he said, I'm not going to ride a horse that looks like Bugs Bunny. I don't know if that was necessarily the case. What happened is he rode him in the Derby, and he lugged in the Derby. And Eddie said, Jack, don't put me on that horse again. I will not ride that horse. He's crazy. And the next race was Cordero, and sure enough, Cordero beat Eddie on Gate Dancer in the Preakness and won the Preakness, and so that was the end of Eddie's ride on Gate Dancer. So, yeah, he was an amazing animal. If he ever put it all together at the same time, he was a sight to behold because he was an amazing horse.
So, in addition to the hood with ears, or the Bugs Bunny, which you'll see a lot of people have now copied Jack Van Berg, there are multiple different types of blinkers. These are half cups as opposed to full cups. And I do want to invite everybody to come up and take a look because the full cups, these are interesting. Pop this out. You'll see that there's ridges. So basically, trainers can whittle, for lack of a better word, whittle these down to however they need. So how do you decide, Tom, what size cup a horse needs?
Basically, it's the same thing we talked about with the sound. It's the same thing with the sight. So a horse that has more sensory issues with sight, okay, remember we talked about the monocular vision? So anything on the side, the further back they can see, they don't know how far that object is, whether it's a horse, whether it's a shrub on the infield. They see something and they're going to want to shy from it, okay, and they don't focus. They're more worried about paying attention to the things around them than they are the job at hand, the task at hand in running. And so what you'll do is, depending on the severity of their sensory issues with their sight, is you can change the size of their blinker. And what you're doing is you're basically changing their field of vision. So a horse that needs more change, you put more cup on, so now he's only looking in front of him, basically. Horse that just needs a little correction, that he's more worried about what's right around his back end, you just put a smaller blinker on so he can't see directly behind him, basically. And those are the things, and not that a horse can see directly behind them, but they have about 340 degrees or 350 degrees of vision, so they will see actually real close to their hind ends. And it might just be a glimmer of something, but some of those horses will react to it or lose focus because of it. And so what you'll do is you'll change the size of those cups on the blinkers. And now you'll see them, these are more of like a polyurethane type deal, or a poly. What they used to be is they used to be leather. They were made out of leather back in the old days. And leather, you know, as wheel tends to get cracked and wears over time, these things are indestructible pretty much. And you can customize them a lot more. And so you'll see different size of cups on blinkers for different needs of horses.
Now, you'll also see sometimes somebody will whittle out a little star or a hole in the corner, just like that. What's the purpose of that?
That's basically the same thing. Is some horses need to reduce that field of vision, but they also will respond if they're competitive enough to a horse coming up on their side. And so what you're trying to do is just give them a little glimpse that you don't want a horse surprising them, and they're easing up, and that horse comes up to them, and he gets by them before they know it's there. And so what you'll do is you'll put a little hole in the blinker, and that allows them to get that glimpse of that horse and to re-engage with that horse if they're running down the stretch, and you're looking for, you know, a finish with that other horse instead of letting that horse get ahead of him before the horse knows that he's up at his side.
So basically, the safety equipment, you'll notice all the riders here at Oaklawn Park have to be wearing a safety vest and a helmet to set foot on the racetrack. So as you can see, this is a jockey helmet. I believe this is Alex Berzer's because it's a little tiny little jockey helmet. Safety vest. You'll notice that multiple sets of goggles, as I mentioned, and this is just a generic saddle towel. You'll notice that all the trainers have saddle towels. It's almost like personal branding. You'll notice that yours are purple and gold, which he carries on the colors of his dad. And this is an exercise saddle. So how many saddles do you guys have at the barn?
Well, we probably have 12, I think.
Yeah, so 12. And these suckers are not cheap, but they last a very long time.
Yeah, they definitely do. If you take care of them, it's the same thing with any kind of leather product. If you take care of them, condition them, and clean them, they'll last forever. And there are parts that are replaceable if there's issues with them, and they can repair them. So the main thing is there's a tree, a metal tree in here that gives it the shape and disperses the weight of the rider through the horse's back. And so as long as that's good, the rest of this stuff all can be repaired. And you can change it and keep it going for a long, long time.
So basically, the one thing I did want to compare is this is one that we actually don't use, but this is a comparison of an exercise saddle and a comparison to a small jockey saddle. This is a small jock saddle and a large jockey saddle. So when a jock has to carry a large amount of weight or a large amount of weight.
Well, if he needs to add on,
if he needs to add some weight,
yes, yeah.
He's going to carry this is his large saddle. You can see it's still extremely lightway, and this is this is basically just some irons.
Yeah, I think that's for like a wiener dog or something. I've never seen a jockey ride one that small before.
Yeah, this is for the wiener
dog.
dog.
That guy needs to start another career if he's riding that small of a saddle, if he's that big.
I've seen several come out, and it's like, what's the point? Just belly up and just bareback them on home.
Yeah.
So
he needs to reduce. He needs to get a better nutrition.
Jockey boots. There's really not much to. Did you ever ride?
No. Just, on the pony.
Just the pony. Just the pony.
I was 6'5", like in 3rd grade.
And as you can see, every owner has their branding, just like trainers have their own branding, and owner silks. So that's one of the joys of getting to, in addition to get your monthly bill from the trainer, is get to have your own set of silks. Any quick questions? Oh, and the whip. That's one of the favorite things to steal from a jock if they don't follow two
just
instructions.
Like a baseball player's bat. If you get the whip, that's their tool of the trade. Over the years, these things have changed. It's called the popper. And now you'll hear...
Those have changed recently. Because now they can't be shiny on the end.
Well,
they have
that
to
changed
be dull.
too. But the big poppers, the extended poppers, loud poppers came out just when I stopped training a while back. But what happened is the old poppers were solid leather. And they would leave marks on the horse when
they
you hit them. And
they hurt badly.
Well, a lot of times the horse is responding to the sound as much as they're responding from the feel. And so what they did is they made a shorter, wider popper, and it made a lot more sound, even though it didn't hit the horse as hard. And so that horse would hear the sound and react to the sound of that popper. And so these have changed, actually, the popper part of the whip a lot more in the last 10 years probably than they had in the previous 50 or 60 years. And so what they're trying to do is they're always trying to change to help the horse out and make the horse have an easier time on the track.
Now, there's one equipment that I obviously could not put out on the table, but one thing you will hear me discuss is the horse is making his first start as a gelding. That is when a male, it's when a male
put that
horse
equipment out here if you want.
Yeah, I'm not going to do that.
Cowboys do.
Is when in the crock pot. That is when a male horse has been castrated. A lot of times that's a big handicapping angle for people, and that's explain why a trainer would castrate a horse.
Well, there's two different issues when you have horses with issues with their gelding or not gelding. One of them is just attitude. A stud horse, stud colt, can be a lot more aggressive, and it's harder to get him to focus on what we need to be doing or what he needs to be doing. So that's one issue. Another thing can be they actually physically hurt the horse if they're too large. There's a term called a ridgeling, and what a ridgeling means is he only has one descended testicle, and what happens is that one that's still up in his belly can hurt. And so what happens is sometimes they won't show it to you, but they act out because of something hurting him. You'll see that a lot of horses, and the really good trainers can figure out why they're acting out. One thing horses can't really do is talk, you know that. So we have to see what their body's telling us and then make an adjustment to find out what's making them unhappy and act the way they do. And so some of those horses, they may never give you signs, or they may give you signs, but a lot of times those if their testicles are too large, they're hurting them, and they'll change their gait, and you'll see them run for a little bit, and they'll stop. What happens is it starts getting painful. And so when you geld them, that can actually ease the physical pain of their hind end. And so some horses, if you geld them, it changes their attitude. It'll give them the focus. When you get a very well-bred horse, it's kind of tough to do. Those owners are looking for a residual career and maybe want to be a stallion. So some of those, better bred horses, you have a tough time doing because they might turn into something really good. You might need those testicles for a career later on. So a gelding angle is always a good angle to look. And if you see a big change in a gelding, first-time gelding, that's usually a good sign that going forward, that change is still going to be maintained after that first race.
Last question. You've got the 9-5 favorite in the first race, Princess of the Nile, Gary Stevens in the irons. thoughts?
I don't know. Gary hadn't won one for us yet, so I hope he changes that pattern. That's Gary on pattern for me. I need a win. But
no pressure, Gary Stevens.
Yeah, no, she's in the right spot. I know Gary.
Gary can't screw it up.
Yeah, well, no, I'm not saying that. Yeah, we've got. It might not be his fault, but we've got left at the gate many a times. In fact, she got left at the gate 2 starts back, and I thought we had her in the right spot then. So I mean, she's doing like you'd like to come into this race. It looks like she's in the right spot with the right company. Just need a little luck. I guess you always can use a little luck, so hopefully we have that today.
Well, we definitely wish you a lot of luck. The sequel is going well, I will add. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a huge Dawn at Oaklawn round of applause for TVB Tom Van Berg. Thank you so much.
Good luck today, everybody.
Say hi to your mom.
Hi, Mom.